My name is Jim Allen, and I am the author of a book called Atlantis, the Andes Solution, and various other books about the site of Atlantis in Bolivia in South America. I have also conducted various studies into the site of Tiwanaku, an ancient city on the high plain in Bolivia, as I was particularly interested in the units of measurement, which are cubits, and also the Tiwanaku calendar. Of these various studies, I find the Tiwanaku calendar to be perhaps the most interesting. This is because the year was not divided into 12 months, as is commonly supposed, but into units of 20. And this should hardly surprise us, because the ancient Mayans and Aztecs of Central America also counted in 20s. But the Tiwanaku calendar not only divides the year into 20 solar months or periods, it also incorporates a lunar calendar which divides every 3 years into 40 lunar months. And all of this information is contained in the icons which are preserved to this day on a stone gateway called the Gate of the Sun, which exists at Tiwanaku. The Tiwanaku calendar is thus one of the greatest and most sophisticated intellectual achievements of ancient man, and to my mind a thing of marvellous beauty. Since it is virtually unknown and ignored in most of the world, including in the country where the great monument stands, I have decided to make this little movie, hoping I can do my best to explain the workings of the Tiwanaku calendar. In the year 2000, I found myself in Tiwanaku with the Discovery Channel filming a documentary to be called Atlantis in the Andes, and in the company of Oscar Corvison, a Bolivian archaeoastronomer of Cuban origins, who was keen to explain his interpretation of the Tiwanaku calendar based upon a division in 20s. Many people think the Gate of the Sun in Tiwanaku is a calendar on account of the number of icons carved into the gate. But Oscar explained that it was not the Sun Gate which was the Tiwanaku calendar, but a wall which today is to one side of the Sun Gate, inside a courtyard called the Casa Sea. Oscar Corvison explained to me about how the Tiwanaku calendar worked using the 11 pillars of the calendar wall, which is located to the side of and behind the Gate of the Sun. But one of the pillars is missing, as is shown by the arrow in this photograph. Many people do not realize that the Casa Sea compound, as it appears today, is a reconstruction carried out in the 1960s. Oscar was particularly upset because he said, in the reconstruction of the western wall of the Casa Sea, one of the large stones, which had originally been part of the calendar wall, had not been restored, but left laying in a field a couple of 100 meters to the west of the wall. Now, Tiwanaku, a few centuries ago, and before the Spanish conquest, was a great and wonderful city, metropolis, but due to climate change and drought affecting the area, it was abandoned and fell into ruin, and certain parts were never completed. However, most of the destruction of Tiwanaku was done by the Spanish conquistadores, who broke up the stones of the city and carried them away for the building of the city of La Paz, and particularly the cathedral in La Paz. Later, when the new railway passed by the site, further destruction was carried out on the old city by smashing up stones to be used as ballast for the railway. When the site was visited by American archaeologist George Squier in 1871, there was no wall to the Casa Sea. It was just a field surrounded by standing stones, as seen in this photo from 1892. All that remained of the calendar wall at the time of George Squier was a row of pillars, and we can see in this view, taken from outside the wall, that the second pillar has fallen down or been pulled down, but also that the fifth pillar from the right is missing. We can also see the Gate of the Sun, half buried in the soil and already broken, even though it had been dug out of the earth and set up in 1825 by José Antonio de Sucre, who was Bolivia's president and thought it symbolic of the new Bolivian nation. The fallen pillar was restored to its place sometime in the past, possibly by a French expedition, but the missing pillar, fifth from the right, was found by Poznański in the middle of the field behind the wall, no doubt having been dragged there by people intending to use it elsewhere, who probably gave up because of the weight of the pillar. Poznański was a great Bolivian patriot and spent a lifetime studying Tiwanaku. He did much to prevent its total destruction and carried out numerous excavations, including that of the original entrance to the Cala Sasea, seen here in these old photographs. Around the 1960s, that entrance had been reconstructed and a wall built between the remaining upright standing stones of the Cala Sasea, including between the remaining pillars of the calendar wall. Now we can see and understand where the pillar is missing from the reconstructed wall, and we can see why Oscar Corvison was so frustrated at it having never been restored. Although Poznański was aware that the wall might be some sort of calendar, he had no idea how it worked. He came up with a scheme dividing the year into 12 months of 30 days, based on the icons on the gate of the sun. But in order to do that, it was necessary to count one of the icons twice. His idea is something that clearly does not work and has no relationship to the actual calendar. Poznański considered the row of pillars as representing a calendar based upon a month of 30 days, probably thinking of the Inca calendar, and because 30 small figures called chasquis appear on the gate of the sun. And he states that the solar year of 12 months was used with the sun showing through the gap between the pillars each month. But that is an error. With 11 pillars, there are only 10 gaps or spaces, not 12. This site in Peru has 13 towers or pillars, called solar towers, which divide the year into 24 fortnights and 12 months. Throughout the year, the sun would rise or set, depending on your viewpoint, over one of the towers as it progressed throughout the year. So, for a division of the year into 12 months, we need 13 towers, not the 11 pillars of Tiwanaku. Oscar gave me a booklet which he had at one time presented to the National Academy of Sciences and the Ministry of Culture, and he explained how the wall was designed so that the pillars divided the year into 20, not into 12. The frieze on the base of the Gate of the Sun is a representation of the calendar wall, and each of the 11 icons of the frieze represents a pillar on the wall. In the centre of the Cala Sasea courtyard, 100 royal cubits from the centre pillar, there is a large block of stone which is said to represent the original observation point. From here, the sun could be watched setting on the horizon over the pillars each night. This satellite image shows the Cala Sasea courtyard with the calendar wall to the west and the observation stone marking the viewing position. How it works. If we begin when the sun sets over the central pillar, it would be one of the equinoxes, when day and night are equal. The sun then moves to the right, and when it sets over the first pillar to the right, a 1/20th of the year will have passed. The sun continues to set to the right until it reaches the end pillar around the 21st of June, when it appears to stand still. This is the solstice and the beginning of the Aymara New Year, when the festival of Inti Raymi is held. After appearing to stand still for a few days, the sun then appears to move to the left, setting each night further along the wall, until a quarter of a year later it sets over the central pillar, marking the September equinox. It then continues to the left-hand pillar, marking half a year has passed, where it stands still before travelling back to the right-hand pillar for the other solstice and the completion of the Aymara year. As can be seen from the carvings on the gate frieze, a messenger blows a trumpet when the sun reaches the end pillars, signalling that it should then return in the other direction. Now let's take a look at that in an animation, and counting the intervals between the pillars on the wall at the same time. We can count the number of divisions by counting along the number of pillars. We start at the right-hand pillar and are counting the spaces or time intervals to the next pillar. So starting at the extreme right, the first pillar to the left becomes 1, arriving at 10 for the extreme left-hand pillar, then returning to complete 20 intervals between the pillars when the sun returns to the extreme right-hand side. Now today, most of us live in large cities where we have no opportunity to see the sunset. We have no idea that throughout the year it appears to travel in one direction or another along the horizon. So that was about as far as I could go with the information that Oscar gave me, and it seemed logical enough that the year should be divided into 20. Why not? After all, the Aztecs, the Mayans, they were counting 20s. Why not the ancient Tiwanakotans? So I put the booklet that Oscar gave me to one side and forgot about it for a number of years. Then one day, browsing the internet, I came across an article written by a Dominican priest in Colombia in the year 1795. In that year, Dr. Jose Domingo Duquesne published a paper detailing the Muisca calendar, which information he claimed to have received from the native Indians themselves. But his paper was later ridiculed and considered only to be an invention of his. The reason that Duquesne's paper was ridiculed was probably that nobody could understand it, and it is quite possible that he himself did not fully understand this calendar. The reason for that we can explain now. The calendar he describes is not one calendar, but 2 calendars running parallel with each other. Let me explain here that these are lunar calendars, and there are 2 types of lunar month. First, there is what we call a synodic month, which is the distance or the time taken from one full moon until the next full moon, and that is a period of 29.53 days. To the Muisca people, 37 of these periods were called an acrotom year. Then there's another type of month called a sidereal lunar month, which is the time taken for the moon to return to the same position relative to the stars, and this time period is 27.32 days. And for the Muisca, 20 of these lunar periods they called a Zocam year. And 2 Zocam years would be equal to a period of 40 sidereal lunar months. Duquesne begins by explaining how the Muiscas counted by their fingers, with names for each number, up to and including the number 20. He then relates a calendar to harvesting and sowing, and begins: El año constaba de 20 lunas y el siglo de 20 años, which is to say, the year consisted of 20 moons and the century of 20 years. Then he goes on to relate this to lunar phases and harvests. My first thought in reading this was that, as at Tiwanaku, they might have divided the solar year into 20 further months. But the text clearly says that 20 lunar months made the year. So he is talking about a lunar calendar, not the 20-division solar calendar, which Oscar Corbison had explained to me. Duquesne continues: 20 moons then made the year. When these were finished, they counted another 20, and thus successively, continuing in a continuous circle until concluding 20 times 20. Then he confuses everything by saying, the inclusion of one moon, which it is necessary to make after the 36th, so that the lunar year corresponded to the solar year, and thus they conserved the regularity of the seasons, which they did with consummate ease. And here is where it becomes difficult to understand, because one moment he is talking about the sidereal lunar year of 40 sidereal months, the next moment he has switched to the full moon calendar, where the 3-year period was equal to 37 synodic months. So here we have two calendars mixed together, one of 20 times 20 sidereal lunar months, and the other of 20 times 37 synodic or full moon lunar months. And a little further along, Duquesne explained how the year of 37 months was actually a period of 36 months plus a sordo or deaf month, so that the year adjusted to the solar year. That is to say, every 36 months they added an extra month to make the lunar months match the 3-year solar cycle. This year of 37 months is called an acrotom year. He also tells us that 20 by 37 of these months corresponds to 60 of our solar years, divided into 4 parts, so that each part was 10 Moisca years, which equaled 15 of our years. From this, we can easily work out that 60 of our solar years divided by 20 times 37 gives a month of 29.61 days, suggesting that here the synodic or full moon month from full moon to full moon was intended, since the synodic month has an average of 29.53 days. But returning to the earlier statement, 20 moons then made the year. When these were finished, they counted another 20, and thus successively, continuing in a continuous circle until concluding 20 times 20, the inclusion of one moon, which it is necessary to make after the 36th, so that the lunar year corresponded to the solar year, and thus they conserved the regularity of the seasons, which they did with consummate ease. What I think is meant here is that they counted in 20 times 20, then added an extra month to the sidereal calendar in the same manner as they added an extra month to the 36th month synodic calendar to make 37. So the real figure here is not 20 by 20 equals 400, but 20 times 20 plus 1 equals 401. And this extra month brought the sidereal, or the Zocam, lunar calendar back into line with the solar calendar. So every 3 solar years equals a Moisca acrotom year of 37 synodic months of 29.53 days, and at the same time corresponds to 40 sidereal lunar months of 27.32 days, which is 2 Zocam years of the Moiscas. So the next thing I wondered was if any of this information could be applied to the Tiwanaku calendar. Many people thought the gate of the sun was a calendar, but as explained earlier, it is the wall with the 11 pillars which is the actual functioning calendar. And the gate of the sun, with the many icons called chaskis, or messengers of the gods, is the key of how to operate the wall calendar. First of all, remember the frieze on the lower half of the panels of the gate of the sun? It includes 11 icons representing the 11 pillars of the calendar wall. Well, running around the pillar icons like a thread are representations of 40 condor heads. Not only that, They are divided in two groups, each of 20 heads. Each row of 20 heads represents the 20 sidereal lunar months of the Moisca Zokam year, and the total of 40 months represents 2 times Zokam years, or a period of 3 solar years. Now let us look again at the actual chasquis on the gate of the sun. There are a total of 30 chasquis, arranged 15 on each side of the central figure. A total of 10 with condor heads are looking upwards, and a total of 20 which have human heads are looking sideways. But what can it all mean? What do the figures represent? Well, instead of counting the figures horizontally, we count them vertically. We find they are arranged in columns of 3. But 3 what? Consider this. If each chasqui represented 1 solar year, then the 3 vertical chasquis would represent a period of 3 solar years, which would be equal to the 40 condor heads on the frieze underneath. When the sun crosses from the centre to the first pillar, 1/20th of the solar year has passed, giving a month of 18 days, counting the year as 360 days. The remaining 5 1/4 days are lost when the sun stands still at each end of the calendar wall. Something unnoticed by Oscar Corvison is that when the sun has crossed 1 1/2 pillars, 1 sidereal lunar month will have gone by. We can animate this drawing by Corvison so that this animation shows the sun setting over the pillars each night, whilst the upper diagram shows the Earth progressing on its orbit with 1 year divided into 20 corresponding stations. Every 3 orbits or 3 years on the calendar wall would equal 40 sidereal months in the lunar calendar. Since each chasqui represents a solar year, and counting in 3s, then 3 chasquis or years make 1 acrotom year of 37 synodic lunar months, or 2 times Zokam years of 20 sidereal lunar months. There are 15 chasquis on each side of the central figure, and each block of 15 chasquis would represent 15 solar years, which would be 5 Moisca acrotom years of 37 synodic months of 29.53 days, or 10 Moisca Zokam years of 20 sidereal months of 27.32 days. Each of the sections with 15 chasquis corresponds to the period of 15 solar years, which Duquesne tells us was 1/4 of the great century of the Moiscas. The 30 chasquis represent 30 solar years, equal to 20 Zokam years of 20 sidereal lunar months, or 10 acrotom years of 37 synodic lunar months, and make a half-century of the Moisca calendar. The 20 chasquis looking sideways represent the 20 Zokam years of the Moisca calendar, and the 10 chasquis looking upwards represent the 10 acrotom years of the Moisca calendar. And twice times the 30 chasquis gives 60 chasquis, representing 60 solar years, completing the great century of the Moiscas, which was therefore 40 Moisca Zokam lunar years, or 20 Moisca acrotom lunar years. After 30 solar years have gone by, it becomes necessary to add 1 sidereal lunar month to the sidereal lunar calendar, making it 20 times 20 plus 1 equals 401 sidereal lunar months, to bring it back into line with the solar year. At the same time of adding 1 sidereal month to the Zokam sidereal calendar, It also becomes necessary to add one synodic lunar month to the Moiska Akratom calendar, making it 10 times 37 plus 1 synodic lunar months, to also bring it into line with both the sidereal lunar calendar and the actual solar year. The maths: 30 times solar years of 365.24219 days would be 10957 days. A period of 20 Zokam years would be 400 sidereal months of 27.32 days, which is only 10928 days. But if we add 1 month of 27.32 days, it comes to 10955 days, only 2 days short of the 30-year solar calendar. Similarly, 10 Akratom years or periods of 37 months of 29.53 days comes to 10926 days. Add an extra month of 29.53 days and it comes as well to 10955, and it's again 2 days out from the 30-year solar calendar. So after a period of 30 years, by adding an extra month to both lunar calendars, the difference in the time count is only about 2 days difference. The first European to visit the site of Tiwanaku and write an account was the conquistador Pedro Cieza de Leon, who described it in his Crónica del Perú of 1549. Cieza de Leon records that the city was already long abandoned in the time of the first Inca. It had not been built by the Incas, and the locals had no idea who had built it. He also recorded that the people of that region, that is to say the Aymara, used a year of 10 months. Here is what Cieza de Leon actually says. Quote, "Among the people of the Collao, there are men of great intelligence, who reply to what is asked from them, and they take account of time, and know some of the movements both of the sun and the moon. They count their years from 10 months to 10 months. Another historian called Acosta tells us the Inca calendar was reformed by the Inca ruler Pachacutec. Perhaps it was at this time that the ancient calendar was changed from the 10 and 20 month divisions to the 12 month division of the Incas, and the true Tiwanaku calendar, with the division of the year into 20 and 10 months, became lost to the modern world. The Tiwanaku calendar, then, not only counts in divisions of 20, which we could call fortnights or half months, it also counts 10 months of 36 days to the year. And since the Andean week was of 9 days, each of these months was 4 weeks of 9 days. It is like a giant celestial clock, ticking up the solar months, the lunar months, and the cycles known as Saros cycles, which were 18 solar years or 20 Inca years, and used to predict eclipses of sun and moon. Well, thank you very much for watching my little video, and I hope it may inspire some of you, if you ever have the chance to visit Tiwanaku in Bolivia, to have a closer look at the calendar wall and the Gate of the Sun, and marvel at the skills of these ancient lost peoples of the Andes.